Imagine being insulted in a language someone thought you could never understand. That's exactly what happened when a billionaire CEO mocked a young black waitress in Arabic. But what he didn't know was that she spoke the language better than him. And when she answered back, the entire room, money, power, and prestige filled the air that evening, thick and heavy like an invisible perfume. The grand ballroom of the Imperial Hotel glittered under a sea of golden chandeliers. Polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of candlelight, and every table gleamed with silver cutlery and crystal glasses that sparkled like diamonds. The event was no ordinary dinner. It was the city's most exclusive charity gala, a gathering that combined luxury, influence, and the unspoken competition of who could outshine whom. The room buzzed with carefully measured laughter and hushed conversations. Business tycoons in tailored suits exchanged handshakes worth millions. Politicians mingled with celebrities, and photographers darted about, desperate to capture the night's perfect shot. To the guests, it wasn't just about raising funds for charity. It was a stage to display wealth, to strengthen networks, and to prove their standing in society. At the center of one of the grandest tables sat Mr. Kareem Al-Fahad, a billionaire CEO from the Middle East. Even in a room full of the powerful, his presence was hard to miss. His watch, custom-made and studded with rare gems, glittered almost as much as the chandeliers above. His suit, cut from the finest Italian fabric, was tailored to perfection. Around him sat business partners, admirers, and associates, all leaning slightly toward him as though the very act of proximity could elevate their status. Kareem was known for his brilliance in business, turning small ventures into global empires, but equally known for his arrogance. To his peers, he was a man of influence. To those who served him, he was a man to be feared. His reputation traveled far, confident, ruthless, and dismissive of anyone he considered beneath him. He had an aura of untouchability, the kind that comes when someone believes money shields him from consequence. As the evening wore on, waiters and waitresses glided gracefully between tables, balancing trays laden with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. To the wealthy guests, there were background details, part of the decor, no more significant than the polished silverware. But for the staff, every second mattered. Every smile had to be perfect, every movement seamless, because in a room like this, mistakes weren't forgiven, they were punished. Among them was Maya, a young black woman working her evening shift. She wore the hotel's crisp uniform, her hair neatly tied back, and her posture straight despite the exhaustion of a long day. To the guests, she was invisible. To Maya, this was just another night of hard work, a step toward paying for her studies and supporting her family. But Maya was no ordinary waitress. She had a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, and an intelligence that few knew about. Fluent in multiple languages, including English, French, and Arabic, she was far more capable than anyone in that room imagined. Yet to most, she was simply the help. And it was this very underestimation that would set the stage for what was about to unfold. As Maya approached Kareem's table with a tray of drinks, the billionaire leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. His eyes followed her every step, but not with respect. To him, she was just another server, faceless, replaceable. Turning slightly toward the man seated beside him, Kareem lowered his voice and spoke in Arabic, certain that his words were safe behind the shield of language. Look at her. Even the servant is trying to look elegant. What a waste. The men at his table chuckled softly, their laughter carefully masked behind glasses of wine. To them, it was nothing, a casual cruelty, a passing joke. Kareem felt untouchable, confident no one outside his circle could possibly understand. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maya understood every word. She heard the insult as clearly as if it had been spoken in English. The sting of it landed deep, but behind her calm smile, something powerful stirred. In that glittering ballroom filled with the elite, a collision was about to take place. A man who believed respect could be bought was about to be humbled by a woman he thought was invisible, and it would happen in the very language he thought was a secret that went silent. As she stood before the table, tray in hand, Maya glanced briefly at Kareem. His smirk was still there, his posture relaxed, his eyes carrying that same look of superiority. He had no idea she had understood him, no idea that the invisible line he thought protected him had already been crossed. The ballroom carried on around them, music playing, glasses clinking, conversations flowing. But at that table, time seemed to slow. Maya's silence in that brief moment was not weakness. It was a gathering of courage, the steadying of her resolve. Her thoughts sharpened into a single decision. I will not walk away quietly. Not this time. The weight of the tray no longer felt heavy. The sting of his insult no longer weakened her. It fueled her. She realized something important. Kareem's power was built on the assumption that people like her would stay silent, that they would accept disrespect because of their position. But she had something he didn't expect: knowledge, intelligence, and the ability to respond in the very language he thought was his secret weapon. Maya straightened her back, her eyes locking with his for a fleeting second. The spark of determination in her gaze was small, but unmistakable. She was ready. And in that moment, before she opened her mouth to speak, one thing became certain. The billionaire CEO who thought he owned the room was about to learn that arrogance has a price, and it would be paid in front of everyone. With calm composure, Maya set the tray down on the edge of the table. Not a single glass wobbled. Her movements were precise, deliberate, like a performer stepping onto a stage for the most important act of her life. She straightened slowly, her hands folding neatly in front of her, and then she did something no one in the room expected. She looked directly at Kareem. Her eyes did not dart nervously to the side or drop toward the floor, as waitstaff were trained to do in the presence of wealthy guests. No, her gaze locked with his, unwavering and unflinching. It was the kind of look that stripped away the shield of arrogance, the kind that forced even the proudest man to recognize a human being standing before him. And then, her voice cut to the soft of a conversation, clear and steady, in flawless Arabic. Sir, you may see me as just a servant, but at least I treat everyone with respect. Wealth may give you money, but it does not give you manners. The words hung in the air like lightning frozen mid-strike. For a heartbeat, the entire table went silent. The men who had chuckled only moments earlier froze with their glasses halfway to their lips, their jaws slack. The laughter that had bubbled at Kareem's joke evaporated instantly, replaced with wide-eyed disbelief. Kareem's smirk vanished as though it had been slapped off his face. His eyes widened, and the color drained from his cheeks before rushing back in a deep flush of red. His confidence cracked, replaced by shock and a sudden awareness that the joke he thought had been private was now public humiliation. Around them, the ballroom began to stir. Whispers spread like a ripple across water. Guests leaned toward each other, murmuring questions. Did she just answer him in Arabic? What did she say? Heads turned, eyes darted toward the billionaire and the waitress. For once, it wasn't Kareem who commanded the spotlight. It was Maya. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The strength in her tone, the clarity of her words, and the elegance of her language spoke louder than a shout ever could. Her accent was impeccable, her confidence undeniable. She had turned his private insult into his very public downfall, and she had done it with nothing but respect and truth. Kareem's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He was a man used to control, to having the last word in every conversation, every boardroom, every negotiation. Yet here he was, stripped of that power by someone he had dismissed as insignificant. The silence stretched. It was thick, heavy, and suffocating for him. For Maya, it was liberation. She held his gaze for just a moment longer, her expression calm but resolute. There was no malice in her eyes, only dignity. Then, without waiting for a reply, she turned. Her steps were measured, graceful, and unhurried. Each movement spoke louder than words. I have said what I needed to say, and that is enough. As she walked away, the whispers grew louder. Some guests exchanged stunned looks. A few smiled faintly, their admiration hidden but undeniable. Even members of the staff, who had been trained to remain invisible, couldn't help but steal glances, their faces lit with quiet pride. For Maya, It wasn't about embarrassing a billionaire. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming her dignity, about proving that respect wasn't determined by money or status. In that moment, she had shown the entire room something priceless: courage. And for Kareem, the lesson was unforgettable. The arrogance that had once shielded him now felt like a weight dragging him down. He could buy companies, buildings, even entire islands, but he couldn't buy back the respect he had just lost. By the time Maya disappeared into the crowd of servers, the balance of power in that glittering ballroom had shifted. A billionaire had been silenced, and a waitress had become unforgettable. News of Maya's response spread across the ballroom like a spark catching fire in dry grass. At first, it was just a ripple, whispers between neighboring tables, curious glances stolen from across the room. But within minutes, nearly everyone had heard that the waitress had confronted the billionaire in his own language, and more importantly, that she had won. Some guests clapped quietly, discreetly tapping their hands against the tablecloths so as not to make a scene. Others smiled openly, their admiration shining through. A few raised their glasses in her direction, subtle gestures of respect from people who understood the courage it took to do what she had done. The staff, usually trained to remain invisible, exchanged glances filled with pride. For years, they had endured rude remarks, dismissive gestures, and the constant reminder that the wealthy, they were little more than shadows in the room. But tonight, one of their own had stood tall. Maya had given them all a voice, and in doing so, she had earned something even rarer than applause. She had earned respect. Even some of the CEOs, people accustomed to commanding boardrooms and dominating markets, nodded quietly in approval. They recognized what just happened, not a public insult, but a demonstration of unshakable dignity. In their world of negotiations and power struggles, they understood the strength it took for someone to hold their ground in the face of authority. And then there was Kareem. The incident shook him to his core. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, he wasn't the man who had the upper hand. He had been outmaneuvered, not in business, but in character. His laughter had been silenced, his arrogance exposed, and his pride crushed, all without Maya raising her voice or breaking her composure. The bitter truth settled on him like a stone. Money could buy influence, but it could not buy respect. Respect had to be earned. And in that moment, Maya had more of it than he did. As the evening dragged on, Kareem tried to mask his embarrassment. He poured himself another drink, forced a stiff smile, and pretended to rejoin the conversations at his table. But no matter how hard he tried, the memory of Maya's words echoed in his mind, louder than the chatter around him. For the first time, he felt small. When the event finally ended, Maya slipped quietly into the staff corridor, hoping to leave without drawing more attention. She was tired. Her feet ached from hours of walking, her arms sore from carrying trays. But her heart carried a different weight that night. Not exhaustion, but pride. She had faced a man who tried to strip her dignity, and she had answered with courage. But before she could leave, something unexpected happened. Several guests approached her. Instead of scolding her for speaking out, they praised her. One woman, a respected business leader known for supporting young talent, walked straight up to Maya and shook her hand. "You reminded all of us tonight," the woman said, her eyes warm with admiration, "that intelligence and respect matter more than wealth. I'd like to help you. If you're studying, consider this an offer. I'll sponsor your tuition." Maya's eyes widened. For a moment, she thought she had misheard, but the sincerity in the woman's voice was unmistakable. Gratitude filled her chest, but even more powerful was the realization that her courage had opened doors she hadn't even dared to imagine. Other guests echoed the woman's sentiments, offering encouragement and support. They told her how impressed they were by her command of Arabic, how proud they were that she stood her ground. To them, she wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a symbol of dignity, a reminder that respect must always flow both ways. When Maya finally walked out of the hotel that night, the city lights greeted her like stars scattered across the sky. Her body was weary, but her spirit soared. She knew she would return to the same uniform and the same shift the next day, but she would never walk into that ballroom as just a waitress again. She had proven something not only to Kareem, but to herself. Her voice mattered, and her dignity was untouchable. And as for Kareem, he never mocked a waitress again. In fact, those who knew him noticed a subtle change. The sharp edge of his arrogance dulled just enough to show restraint. Perhaps it wasn't kindness, but caution. Perhaps it wasn't humility, but the memory of being publicly humbled. Either way, the lesson lingered. Because that night, in a ballroom filled with chandeliers and champagne, a billionaire learned the one truth money could never buy: respect.